My next guest was arrested at the age of 16. He was found guilty of rape and murder, and he was sent to prison. And then when he turned 33, he was freed after DNA evidence proved he was actually innocent. But by that time, the actual murderer had already killed another victim. Now Jeffrey Deskovic is committed to helping others who are falsely accused, as he was, and that includes pushing for changes to New York's DNA database. Jeffrey Deskovic is actually joining me in the studio now, and I am very pleased to welcome you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I remember this case very well because you and your case became a major issue in the 2006 State Attorney General's race. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I made public statements being critical of the role Ms. Pirro, who was a candidate at the time, played in preserving my wrongful conviction.
Right. She, at the time, was the Westchester County DA. She was the former Westchester County DA, right, the district attorney. And she had received a letter from you and from your counsel asking for DNA to be revisited, and she did not.
Yeah, exactly right. And it was also in the federal documents in 1999.
Her argument at the time, if I remember correctly, was that the search of the database that you were requesting was not possible. Is that correct?
No, her argument was that no new information was presented to her in order to justify, doing anything further with the DNA.
I see.
But that same lack of non-information was enough for her successor to allow me to have the testing, and that ultimately cleared me.
And her successor was Janet DeFiore. I mean, the reason why all of this is sort of ironic now is because Ms. Pirro was running against a gentleman named Andrew Cuomo, who went on to become State Attorney General, and now he is governor, and you are lobbying him, so to speak, right?
Yes, I am.
You actually, he was actually quite outspoken in criticizing Ms. Pirro regarding her refusal to take another look at your case. Now he seems at least to be opposing the idea of what you are pushing, of not just expanding the DNA database, but adding in some preservations to avoid wrongful convictions like the one you experienced. So what is your feeling about that, about the governor?
Well, he's pushing for DNA database expansion, but he did say publicly he was open to compromise in terms of including other provisions which are currently not in the version of the bill that the Senate just passed.
Right.
Those provisions that I advocate for, that I want to have included, would be mandatory equal access to the DNA database by both sides. Defendant would have a right to that, rather than it being in the hands of the prosecutor, and the judge would be able to order that enforcement. And that also a standardized evidence preservation system, so that we don't have to worry about DNA being lost or destroyed in those 10 or 12% cases where it exists. He hasn't said that he's opposed to the other reforms. He just doesn't want to link them all in the same bill.
Right.
I would certainly hope that just as much energy as he's put thus far into wanting the database to be expanded, that he would make it an equally important initiatives for videotaping interrogations, for having identification reform, and other measures that cause wrongful convictions.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's true. He has not said that he's actually opposed per se, and this is something that the Assembly Democrats are holding out for, it seems. And then also we have the Bar Association. Vincent Doyle was here speaking to me. Yourself, obviously, the Chief Judge of the state. We have the New York Times editorial board and a number of other editorial pages across the state who are pushing for this. The problem is that linkage in Albany is how things get done, right? So I think that there's some concern that if this doesn't get linked and just a straight bill passes, then the opportunity that you might actually have a window for here would be lost. So is it worth it to you to hold out past this year in order to get the whole package done?
I'm calling for a compromise that would have the equal access to DNA-only related issues, like I've just laid out, rather than linking them to all the other issues. I think my concern is that I don't believe linking everything together is going to result in a package. Okay, while I'm shoulder to shoulder with the other advocates and wanting the other reforms to be passed, the difference is, in terms of linking them all together, I don't think that the New York State Senate wants DNA database expansion enough that they're essentially going to trade 4 for 1.
Right.
And I think what's going to happen is we're going to wind up with nothing at all, rather than seizing the moment and making the system better as it is. So
you're suggesting just DNA-related expansion, and not things like videotaped interrogations, for example, and some of the other provisions that are being advocated for by, for example, the Bar Association.
Right. I think, yes. I've spent a number of years in Albany advocating for the passage of, and in other states as well, advocating for the passage of videotape interrogations, identification, and reform. So I'm not opposed to those. I'm just saying those should be considered separately. It's never going to pass linking it all together.
It's interesting though, because as of right now, there's this clean bill that passed the Senate, so it's halfway there. I mean, getting something amended is a little bit more of a hurdle, right?
It's work, yes, but it is work. But I think there's some room for negotiation.
You also actually, right after the governor was elected in 2010, wrote a letter to him, and this is on a totally different topic. This actually has to do with opportunities in prison for prisoners to get advanced degrees, actually, which you argue cuts down on the rate of recidivism. Did you hear back from him on that?
No, I did not. And he's been silent on the issue of inmate education, which I think, when viewed properly, is a serious crime prevention tool.
And also, for example, we haven't seen any pardons or clemencies from the governor. I mean, the reason why I'm bringing these things up is it seems to be all of one and the same in terms of criminal justice issues, and something obviously that you unfortunately know intimately. And people, I think, expected something from him when he was Attorney General, then arrived in the governor's office, and they haven't seen it.
Well, I mean, I think, but you haven't really asked me a question. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just curious if you are satisfied with what you've seen so far. For example, you didn't receive a response from the governor after you wrote this letter, which appeared actually in the form of an editorial, right?
Yes.
And I wondered if you were satisfied with his positions on, particularly with inmate justice, for example.
No, I'm not. Any time I advocate for a measure that's either wrongful conviction related or it seeks to improve the criminal justice system, and there's no response, how could I be satisfied? It's not as though issues that I'm advocating I'm just making up out of the sky and there's no data to support how it would be a helpful public policy. So certainly I didn't write that hoping he would just be silent on the issue. I wanted him to, and still want him to, take leadership and make the argument that in the long run we're saving money, we're preventing crime victims if we allow prisoners to receive education. Just like I want him to take public and moral positions and use his political capital to get measures passed that would prevent future wrongful convictions. If he could speak about it in a debate in order to get elected as an official, why can't he speak about it now that he's in office and make it a priority?
Yeah, it's interesting because the governor and he's launched a website that I'm sure you've probably seen, and to push for the DNA database expansion, and the Senate Republicans talk about their desire to expand the database not only to catch criminals but also to cut down on wrongful convictions. But folks like yourself argue, and I think, that you need to do more than just that. So does it seem to you to be lip service when they say, we want wrongful convictions, we're very interested in expanding the database for that, but when only 10% of crimes involve DNA, then perhaps it's actually not what they're putting it out to be?
It clearly is lip service, or the Senate, many bills, many wrongful conviction measures that have been passed in the Assembly, have died in the Senate. So until that changes, and the Senate asserts leadership and starts passing its version of identification reform, videotaping interrogations, and other wrongful conviction measures, it is just lip service. And further evidence of that is the database bill that they did pass. While they might tote it as a wrongful conviction measure, it doesn't have equal access and mandatory reporting for both sides. So it's not a wrongful conviction bill. They simply want it as yet another tool for law enforcement to arrest and incarcerate criminals, which is fine by me, except for the fact that it should be for both sides. It's not their plaything. This is people's lives at stake. As you unfortunately know all too well. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Deskovic, for coming to be with us. It's very interesting to have you here. I appreciate it. Absolutely a pleasure to be here. Thank you.